and welcome to this week's video. This week we're going to look at some compositional elements to help you to start to put some things together to create some still lives. Hopefully you've already seen the video looking at the golden section and how that can be used in composition. But in this video I want to combine that with looking at simple devices that we can be using for composition, and these are known as compositional shapes. They're easily identified and seen how different artists use them, and they're easy things to then incorporate into your own setups and how you put certain objects together. In terms of this week's exercise, keep it very simple. We're almost going back to how we drew in week 1 and week 2. Simple, big masses, maybe break them down again into a light and a dark, which you'll see me do in the demonstration. But the first key element of the exercise is to get yourself a piece of cardboard, just a fine cardboard like this, and cut a 12 by 15 centimetre rectangle out of it. This will be useful for this exercise and for exercise going into the future, in that you're able to place this down onto your piece of paper or canvas. If you want to do this, you could be doing these exercises as little paintings too, and trace around that shape so that you're working within a set format. This proportion to this format is a classic proportion used in still life. It's not too long and skinny that it looks like a landscape. It has a slight squareness almost to it, and it's a very, very commonly used shape in composition for still life. Let's now look at some paintings and identifying and seeing the compositional shapes within them. This first example is by the Australian artist Margaret Olley, called Clivias, painted in 1984. This composition has a circular shape to it, in that the eye travels around in a comfortable circle from the Clivias to the compote there on the left, through the bowls along the bottom and to the right, and then back up to the Clivia. This next example is by another Australian artist, Max Meldrum, called Still Life with Daffodils, painted in not sure what year. This is a classic example of the triangular shaped composition used on its point. You will see the triangle used on its base as well, but is commonly seen when you paint flowers. Painted by one of the great Dutch masters, Peter Claus, this is Still Life with Silver Beaker, painted in 1642. This is a classic example of the L-shaped composition, where there is a strong upright followed through with a strong elements there from left to right. This is Margaret Preston, Implement Blue, painted in 1927, and this demonstrates the use of the diagonal in composition, where she has lined up all the objects in line, and that they're travelling from top right through to bottom left. This is probably a very dramatic example of the use of a diagonal in composition. You will find the diagonal sometimes a lot more subtle in other painters' work. Still Life with Apples and Pears, painted in 1872 by the Impressionist Camille Pissarro. This demonstrates the compositional device of a group. He has placed everything within the basket, all the pears, and grouped them quite centrally within the canvas. This is by Edouard Manet, Fish, Still Life, painted in 1864, and demonstrates the compositional device of radiation, where there seems to be lines pointing to one single point within the painting. So you can see that sort of the top and along the bottom of that large fish sort of point into the centre of the canvas, and that the other elements there to the left also start to point towards that same area. In this example of a cross composition, where there is a strong centre line and then a strong element going across horizontally, we see this painting by Matisse, Pot of Geraniums, painted in 1912. Him use this to place the geraniums within the context of a hothouse, or maybe next to the garden shed. This is a painting by the English artist William Scott called On a Title, Poem for a Jug, painted in 1980. It's an example of the use of what we call a steelyard, where you have one large mass balanced by one smaller mass, and normally that the fulcrum of that balance is somewhere there closer to the larger mass. In this painting by the artist Winifred Nicholson, Cyclamen and Primula, painted in 1922 to 23, we see the example of balanced scales, where we have two elements of equal weight balancing one another on either side of this canvas. This is by another Australian artist, Adrian Faint, Flowers in the Sunlight, painted in 1940, and demonstrates the use of the silhouette. Here the painting is backlit, creating a strong shape of that cornucopia vase with the flowers within it, so that there's a strong contrast of light and dark, influencing and creating a strong silhouette. This painting by Sir Cedric Morris, May Flowering Irises, No. 2, painted in 1935, is an example of the compositional device called pattern, where he has used the similar shape of the iris again and again and again, creating an overall patterning to the canvas. The only other shape that I couldn't find an example for you is the S, or compound curved compositional device, which you most commonly see used in the landscape. I'm sure if we spent a little bit more time, probably we would be able to find an example in still life as well. But what I'd like you to do now as part of the beginnings of this week's exercise is now choose a group of objects and play posing them into some of the compositional shapes that I've just shown you. So that first one you saw as an L, that last one just gone is a triangular shape, and then this final one here is that steelyard, that large mass balanced by a smaller mass. So for this week's exercise, work within that set frame that I described earlier, and keep to big, simple masses. So mass the largest areas first into a light and a dark mass, and then introduce your darks, either with a darker pencil or by pressing harder, and work them up before taking out the lights with your needle eraser. Good luck with this week's exercise. As always, I look forward to seeing what you do. Do more than just one. Come up with a series of small, quick drawings like these. They don't have to be heavily detailed, just the broad masses, and displaying a few different compositional shapes. Work with the same objects each time too. Don't try and introduce more and more and more different objects. Take care and see you next time.